Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Abdullah Patel English High School.
Chapter 1 at Mr. Philly Fogg's house, which is in London. So it is the October 2nd, the year 1872. Mr. Phileas Fogg is an English gentleman and he lives in London. He hasn't got a wife or children, but he has got a French servant and his name is Passepartout. Fogg goes to his club every day. So Mr. Fogg is a part of this club which is called as Reform Club, and he goes to this club every day. He eats at his club at 12 o'clock. In the afternoon he reads there. In the evening he eats there again. Then he talks with his friends and at midnight he goes home. So this is his daily routine. Passepartout is happy. He wants a quiet job. Before this, Passepartout was working for a circus, and then he took up the job as a personal servant to Mr. Phileas Fogg. So there's a detail of how Mr. Fogg's day looks like. 8 o'clock he gets up. 8:23 Mr. Phileas Fogg has his breakfast. 9:37 Mr. Phileas Fogg gets ready. 11:30 he goes to the club, and midnight he goes home. So Mr. Phileas Fogg is very particular about his timing, about his breakfast, about getting ready. And Passepartout is his servant who helps him out in his daily chores. But one evening, Fogg sees something interesting in the Times. And that something interesting is about a bank robbery that happened few days back in England, and also about an article that how one can go around the world in 80 days. At the club, Fogg's friends talk. That gentleman thief can't go far, says Ralph. With trains and ships, today's detectives move fast, but thieves can move fast too, Fallagin says. So these are all Phileas Fogg's friends who are a part of the Reform Club, and they say with trains and ships the thief cannot go fast, and there are also detectives who move faster than the thieves. To which Fogg says, today you can go around the world in 80 days, because that was also an article in the newspaper. To which Mr. Stewart says that do it and I'll pay you £20,000. So he challenges. This is actually a wager, a bet, which Mr. Stewart challenges Mr. Fogg to do. And Mr. Fogg readily accepts the bet, saying, I am leaving tonight. Perhaps if I can't do it, then I will pay you £20,000. So here Mr. Phileas Fogg is accepting the bet and says, if I fail to go around the world in 80 days, I will pay you £20,000. Moving on. The train for France leaves before 9 in the evening. Fogg must be back in London by 21st of December. So he leaves on October 2nd, students, and he must be back on 21st December at 8:45, not before that, not after that. So he has to be back at the same time. He may get before that, but nothing beyond 8:45. Fogg starts his journey on October 2nd and must be back on December 21st. Fogg gives his servant £20,000 in a bag, and they all leave for France. But his servant Passepartout isn't very happy. So Fogg takes £20,000 for his expense to move all around the world, and he also takes his dear servant Passepartout with him. They start off their journey and they go to France. Then they take a train to Italy and a ship to Port Said in Egypt. When their ship arrives in Suez, an English detective, Mr. Fix, is waiting. He's looking for a gentleman thief. So here there is a detective following Passepartout and Mr. Phileas Fogg because the detective suspects that the bank robber is Mr. Phileas Fogg, and he also takes a train and a ship. Fogg visits the passport office. Naturally, when Fogg is moving out, Mr. Fogg is moving out from one country to another, he needs to go to the passport office to get its stamp. And please take a note of the date, student. It is October 9th. Mr. Fix sees him there. It's the gentleman thief, he thinks, and I must tell London. So the detective thinks that Mr. Fogg is the gentleman thief, and he also says that I must inform the authorities in London, and so he does so. Chapter 2. Fix looks at Passepartout and asks, "Where are you going?" Passepartout says, "I am going around the world, but right now I need to buy some new clothes." Detective Fix takes him to a shop and leaves him there. So this is where Detective meets Passepartout for the first time. Meanwhile, Mr. Fix sends a telegram to London stating that the gentleman thief is going to Bombay. Stop from Fix. Later on, Mr. Fix gets on the ship and follows Passepartout and Mr. Fogg to Bombay. So a telegram here is sent to London as he suspects Mr. Fogg to be the gentleman. October 20th, and they have arrived at Bombay at 4:30 p.m. So it is the October 20th they have arrived, and they have arrived 2 days earlier. Fogg and Passepartout leave the ship. They want to get a train across India to Calcutta. It leaves at 8 o'clock. So in India they arrive at Bombay. However, now they want to travel all the way to Calcutta. But first, Fogg goes to the passport office. Then he eats at the station. In the meanwhile, Passepartout visits some famous temple, but he does not see the signboard and does not take off his shoes. And the signboard says visitors must remove their shoes. Therefore, the priests of the temple get very angry and they take his shoes, and Passepartout runs away with fear. To get on the train, but Fix stays in Bombay. He is waiting for a reply from London from the higher authorities. And here Mr. Fogg and Passepartout learn that after 3 days the train stops. The railway from Colby to Allahabad isn't ready, and there are some men who are building the railway, but there are 80 kilometers without a railway between Colby and Allahabad, and Mr. Fogg does not have that much time to wait or waste. So they decide for plan B. Plan B is in Colby, Passepartout gets some new shoes. He also finds an elephant to take him to Allahabad. So here they take the journey to Allahabad on an elephant. They stop near a temple in the village of Pillaji. The old Indian prince is dead. His young wife, the princess, must die with him in a big fire. Passepartout and Mr. Fogg sees this and feels helpless, and they think to themselves that we must help the woman. So here Passepartout and Mr. Fogg meets the woman, and that woman's name is Auda, for the first time. The priests start the fire. Through the smoke, Fogg sees something beautiful. The prince stands up and takes the princess out of the fire. The prince and the princess come nearer. Fogg sees that the man is not the prince, but it is Passepartout in the prince's clothing. "Quickly, let's go," says Passepartout to Fogg quietly. So here is an attempt of Passepartout to escape and help Auda from the fire, which is called the Sati system in India. Suddenly, the priests see the prince's body on fire. They see that the man in the prince's clothes is not the prince, and they become very angry. Fogg, Passepartout, and the princess leave very quickly on the elephant. As they leave, they could see the angry villagers following them. Chapter 3, where they arrive at Allahabad, and Mr. Fogg and Passepartout manage to buy some European clothing for the princess, and Mr. Fogg to himself thinks, "What a beautiful woman." They all sit on the train and they are going to Calcutta, where Mrs. Auda speaks for the first time. She says, "My name is Mrs. Auda. Thank you for helping me, but I don't know what to do now. I can never go home." The date is October 24th. Mr. Fogg says, "We can take you to Hong Kong," to which Mrs. Auda says, "Thank you. I have a cousin who lives there and I can stay with my cousin." It is the October 25th. At Calcutta station, a policeman stops them. He takes them to see a judge. Mrs. Auda follows them too. Fix is in Calcutta. Fix is the detective, and the detective must move fast to find the gentleman thief. And all are waiting outside the court, but Fogg and his friends don't see him. Fogg is confused and asks the judge, "Why are we here?" The judge replies, "For breaking the rules in the temple." To which Fogg thinks that is the same rule about the temple he's talking in the village Blangy, to which the judge says no, for breaking the rules in Bombay. And he puts Passepartout's shoes on the table. The judge is very angry and says, "You must go to prison for this," says the judge. But Fogg gives £2,000 to the court and they are free again. They get onto the ship. They get onto the ship for Hong Kong, and Detective Fix follows them. However, Passepartout sees him. Passepartout thinks for himself, perhaps he's a detective and he must be working for one of the Reform Club members in London. The date is November 6th. In Hong Kong, Mrs. Auda learns that her cousin now lives in Holland. To which Mr. Fogg says that you can come with us to Europe. Passepartout is sent to buy 3 tickets on the Carnatic. It leaves for Yokohama in Japan the next morning, but at the ticket office he learns that it's leaving early that evening. Passepartout meets Fix for the second time near the ticket office, and Fix offers him a drink. Says, "Come for a drink," says Mr. Fix. Fix tells Passepartout, "I think your Mr. Fogg is a gentleman thief and I want to arrest him." Passepartout doesn't want to help Fix, but the detective buys drink after drink. So here, Passepartout is drugged with a lot of drink, and Fix unveils the truth to Passepartout, saying that his master is a gentleman thief and that is why Detective Fix is here to arrest him. Passepartout goes to sleep on the table. Now he can't tell Mr. Fogg about the Carnatic, thinks Fix. It leaves tonight, but without Fogg. So now Mr. Fix has a plan to arrest him. Chapter 4. It is the 7th of November. Passepartout leaves with the Carnatic ship without his master and Auda. Later, Passepartout wakes up and he leaves with the ship, but Mr. Fogg and Mrs. Auda aren't with him. Next morning, Mr. Fogg and Mrs. Auda go to the Carnatic but isn't there. This is the time where Mr. Fix and Mr. Fogg meet for the first time. Mr. Fix arrives and said the Carnatic is on the way to Japan and the next ship to Yokohama leaves next week. "Where's Passepartout?" asks Mrs. Auda. "I don't know," says Fogg, "but we must go without him. We must find another ship." Fogg finds a small ship and it goes to Shanghai. There, they can get a big ship to Yokohama. "Can I go with you?" asks Mr. Fix. "Of course," Fogg answers. The ship travels through storms and at last arrives Shanghai, where suddenly Mr. Fogg sees a big ship in front of them, which is on its way to Yokohama, and signals that ship to stop. Passepartout arrives in Yokohama, but he has no money. He leaves the Carnatic to find some work, and he finds some work in a circus. "I can go to America with the circus," he thinks, because the circus was leaving tomorrow, which means the next day, and at present the date is November the 13th. Fogg, Mrs. Auda and Fix get on the big ship and a week later they arrive in Japan. It is 14th November. The Carnatic is in Yokohama. Fogg and Mrs. Auda go on the Carnatic. They find Passepartout's name in the book of passengers' name, but they can't find Passepartout. The ship leaves for San Francisco in few hours, but before they leave, Fogg goes to the circus to find out if Passepartout was there in the circus, to which he finds out Passepartout, and Passepartout is very happy after reuniting with Mr. Fogg. Fogg wants to take Passepartout with him. However, first he must pay the circus owner, Mr. Batulcar. At 6 o'clock in the evening, Fogg, Passepartout and Mrs. Auda go on to the American ship and is followed by the detective Fix. Chapter number 5. "I'm sorry about Hong Kong," says Passepartout. "I usually don't drink much, but—" Later, Passepartout sees Mr. Fix and confronts him. He also tells him that "my master isn't a gentleman thief," he says. To which Mr. Fix says, "Listen, I now have the papers from London to arrest Mr. Fogg, but I can't stop him now. It must be in England, where we get there." They arrive in San Francisco in the morning. The New York train leaves that evening. The date is 3rd of December. Fogg and Mrs. Auda meet Fix in the street. "I am traveling to Europe now. Can we travel together?" he asks. "Of course," answers Mr. Fogg. In the meanwhile, there is a meeting going on, and people in the left shout, "Cammerfield for judge." People in the right shout, "Mandy Boy for judge." So there is an election going on, and there are two parties who are shouting for their respective candidates. And when they are fighting, a man starts fighting with Mr. Fogg. However, the detective Fix stands in front of him and stops him. Passepartout now is a little confused and does not understand why is Mr. Fix helping us. Fogg, Mrs. Auda, Passepartout and Fix get on the train that evening. While they are on the train, they face one of many obstacles in which a bridge, a very old bridge, falls down in the river behind. Later on, they are also attacked by Indians and they also kill some passengers. Passepartout fights them. However, they manage to take Passepartout with them. Fogg, Mrs. Aouda and Fix get off the train, and Mr. Fogg goes and looks out for Passepartout. He finds him and brings him back. But they must wait until evening, until the next train to New York. Things Fix. On the sledge with snails. Soon they arrive. They take a train to New York. They arrive in New York 45 minutes late. Their ship, the China, is on the way to Liverpool. The date is December 11th. Chapter 6. The next morning, Fogg, Mrs. Aouda, Passepartout, and Fix leave on a small ship which is going to France. However, Mr. Fogg bribes the sailor to travel to Liverpool instead of France, and the sailors agree with loads of money. The sailors lock the captain in the room. However, the ship that they were traveling to has no coal and all the wood is burned. The date is December 16th. The ship arrives in New Zealand, that is Queenstown, in the south of Ireland, and there's no more wood. The date is 20th December. Let's get off here, says Mr. Fogg to Mrs. Aouda and Passepartout and Fix. Fix doesn't arrest Fogg in Queenstown. He's waiting for them to arrive in England. The date is 21st of December. They get on a train and travel to Dublin. Dublin is in Ireland. There they get a fast ship to Liverpool. In Liverpool, this is a chance for Mr. Fix to arrest Fogg, and at last he does so and takes him to prison. In prison, Mr. Fogg looks at the diary. The date is 21st of December, 11:40 a.m. They all arrive in Liverpool, where at 2 o'clock he looks at his watch. There's time to go to London on a fast train and to be at my club at 8:45 this evening, he thinks. At 3:30, Fix arrives with Mrs. Aouda and Passepartout. So basically it takes 6 hours to travel to London and they have 9 hours left. However, Mr. Fogg is still under arrest and Fix comes and clears all the confusion. Mr. Fix tells Mr. Fogg that I'm sorry, the gentleman thief, James Strand, is in prison and you are free to go. Angrily and frustrated, Mr. Fogg punches Fix in the face. Then Fogg, Mrs. Aouda and Passepartout run to the Liverpool station. They get a fast train to London. However, the train arrives at 10 minutes to 9. Fogg is 5 minutes late for his meeting with all his friends in the Reform Club. Fogg, dejected, doesn't want to go to meet his friends at the club. Instead, he goes home with Passepartout and Mrs. Aouda. Around the world in 80 days and 5 minutes. He's the loser. He has only £20 in the bank, and which he must give Mr. Stewart, as Mr. Stewart is the winner of the wager. I am sorry for bringing you here to a poor man's home, he says Mrs. Aouda the next morning. However, Mrs. Aouda asks him for marriage and Mr. Fogg says yes. That afternoon, Fogg tells his servant Passepartout that he wishes to marry Mrs. Aouda tomorrow, the 23rd of December, and if he could speak to the Reverend of Marylebone Church about it. Soon Passepartout returns, and he says, Master, today is not 23rd December, neither 22nd of December. However, today is the 21st of December, and when you travel east around the world, you get an extra day. You aren't late for your meeting at the club, however, you must run now. So there's a lot of confusion about the date and the time zone, which is solved by Mr. Passepartout. And Mr. Fogg is delighted to hear that. At 8:45, Fogg enters his club and says, I win. And where is my £20,000? After which, the next Monday, Fogg, the world traveller, marries Mrs. Auda, and he's a very, very happy man. So here, Fogg enters the club at 8:45, which is 5 minutes earlier. He wins the wager and he also gets married. And this is the story about Mr. Phileas Fogg, who completes his journey around the world in 80 days. Thank you everyone for watching. This was Around the World in 80 Days, Part 1. We will be also discussing Part 2, where I will be discussing the theme, the plot, the synopsis, and much.